God gave me a dad voice, you know. Hope everybody's had a good week. I've had a great week myself. We're going to learn about some miracles, or one miracle today, because I know we've been learning about miracles. But the miracle that we're learning about this evening, I almost said this morning, because a lot of times I talk Bible in the morning, so I say this morning. This evening is in all four of the Gospels. So can anybody tell me which miracle, it's the only miracle that's in all four of the Gospels. Can anybody tell me which one that might be? Just to make it interesting. Yeah, Dave, well, you're... Anybody? Any ideas?
I read the lesson, so I'm not cheating.
All right, no cheating if you read the lessons. If you didn't read the lessons, shame on you. That's okay. The feeding of the 5,000. It's the only miracle that's in all four of the Gospels. So we're going to look at that today, but we're going to look at Mark's account of the Gospel today. So why don't we turn to Mark 6. And I always this is a good miracle. It's one of my favorites, probably because it's in all four of the Gospels, so you read it more often than not. But there's a lot that we're going to impact today from this miracle, and there's also going to be some things that we're going to talk about what we can apply into our lives from this Gospel, some things that we can learn. Mark 6. We're actually going to start in verse 6 and kind of get a preamble to the feeding of the 5,000. So in verse 6, this is what it says. And we'll start where it says, Jesus sends out the 12. Then Jesus went around teaching from village to village, calling the 12 to him. He began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over impure spirits. These were his instructions. Take nothing for the journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in your belts. Wear sandals but not an extra shirt. Whenever you enter a house, stay there until you leave that town. And if any place will not welcome you or listen to you, leave that place and shake the dust off of your feet as a testimony against them. They went out and preached that people should repent. They drove out many demons and anointed many sick people with the oil and healed them. I wanted to read this before the miracle because Russ wrote this book and he put it in there. And he's a smart guy. But this is called the Limited Commission. A lot of people call this the Limited Commission. Right? We have the Great Commission, and what is the Great Commission? Go into all the world and preach the good news, baptizing people in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, this right here, he sends them 2 by 2 and sends them out. And I kind of wanted to talk about that. He tells them, take nothing except your staff, no bread, no bags, no money in your belts, wear sandals and not an extra shirt. But then it sounds to me like it's like, and then stay the night at the house. When's the last time you took nothing and stayed the night at somebody's house? Not even a toothbrush.
Been a while.
Unless you're a 13-year-old boy, you probably haven't. But this is called the Limited Commission. So I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on this right here. The calling 12 to them, he began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over impure spirits. So we got 12 disciples sending them out 2 by 2. So that's 6 people going out into the world, into certain areas. Limited as to what God wanted. What are some thoughts that come up in your mind when we read that? Before we get into the feeding of the 5,000, because this is important to that.
So, if their necessities, their things that normally would be their needs, they had to not think about that. You know, not let that be a distraction to what their commission was. And that's, even in our lives, that's sometimes difficult.
If I told you to go out and to tell people about God, but don't take anything with you, just go, would you go?
Well, yeah, God told me to do it. Well, he's telling me to do it anyway.
Well, I know. But I'm just saying, I think most of us, we would struggle with just this
Still not,
concept.
For sure.
You know, because hold on, and you remember when I don't know which apostle it was, but he said, "Let me go tell my sister, or let me go tell my relative before I go follow you." And Jesus said, "No, come on." It's almost kind of like the saying, "No, this is what you're doing. Just trust in me and go."
No, there was no preparation.
No preparation.
They had to trust in the Lord for their subsistence.
Yeah.
So it was a test of their faith as well as those that they were going to go teach.
Mm-hmm. Did you have something, Judy?
That's what I was going to say.
Well, that's great.
I had my hand up.
Hey, Matt.
Yes.
So I don't know everything, right? But I think there's something about back in the day, culturally, it was a little different setup. If you were traveling and you showed up somewhere, I don't know all the ins and outs, but basically you were invited in and you could stay. And I don't know if you could outstay or welcome. I think it was up to you when you left. But it was understood that you'd get fed somewhere if, let's say, you were Jewish and you went to a Jewish town with a Jewish family. So I'm just saying people were a little nicer back then, I think. Like there's something to rest on there.
Well, yeah, and in this case, probably had one tunic, maybe two tunics. It's not like today where, you know, I'm just trying to think and not trying to call Stacy out or anything. But like we went on the honeymoon, it's like, you ready? And it's like, yeah, we're gonna be gone 5 days, and I have a backpack, and she's got this giant luggage that weighs 60 pounds, and it's like, all right, let's go. She's like, you never know what you're gonna need.
Thank you.
You know, she did a great job. But that seems to be, I mean, a lot of people can relate to that. You know, and in this situation, just go. Don't take any money with you. You know, I'm usually the guy that's like, you know, as long as I have my credit card, my cell phone, and my car keys, I'm okay. You know, I'll be okay. Diane, you were going to say something.
Well, but they also went with the power to heal and do miracles.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not excess baggage.
Yeah.
They had the power and to display for themselves and for others that they were relying only on God.
Yeah. I wonder what that would have felt like. You know what I mean? Don't take anything with you, but you can drive out impure spirits. And that seems pretty wild. And I was like, I wonder if there was like some type of feeling that came with that. Go ahead, Dave.
You know, it's easy to focus on the miracles, right? Because that's what we gravitate towards. It's what our eyes kind of go towards. But in reality, it was the message, right? The healing was secondary to the message, right? And that's something that, like when you ask, like the Great Commission, the limited versus the great, right? We like to focus on the miracles, but it's all about the message, right? Proclaim, right? They were supposed to proclaim the message, what? The kingdom of heaven is at hand, repent. That's John's message, right? That's Jesus' message. So I just wanted to point out, it was more about the message and then them trusting in God, and the miracles were to confirm.
Well, it's interesting because I kind of looked at this as like this was Jesus' street team, you know, like he's telling them go 2 by 2, which I find interesting too because other times in the Bible, right, the animals came 2 by 2 on the ark and 2 by 2, and my mind went all over the place with this. But it's almost they didn't take flyers to say, hey, look, something great's going to happen, but they went out and they made it known who they were. And it all pointed towards Jesus. And I find that's really cool. I mean, we have missionaries that come here. We have different speakers that come here to point us in the right direction on what they're doing, to point us, towards that organization or towards God. And this is like a really great example of this. And I think sometimes we don't even look at this when we read I keep saying the parable of the 5,000, but it's the miracle of the 5,000. Feeding of the 5,000. Anybody else got any comments on this? Because we can come back to that too. Yes?
I don't know if anybody said it but they knew that God would provide.
They knew that God would provide, yeah.
Whatever they needed, that He would provide.
It's wild because I struggle with that to this day, and I have pretty much anything that I need. It always reminds me of the movie The Hurt Locker. If anybody's seen the movie Hurt Locker, it's rated R, so if you saw it, shame on you. But it's a really good movie because he's a bomb diffuser in the Iraq War, and he's out in all these high-stress situations, and he's having some trouble at home, and he finally gets out of the service, and he goes home, and this scene always strikes me as like, wow. And he goes into the cereal aisle, he's with his wife and kids, and he's looking in the cereal aisle, and he just pants for hours. It seems like hours, it's only a couple minutes, but he just pants, and the whole aisle is just cereal. And he instantly goes back and enlists because he's like, we have it so good, and there's so many people that don't. And it's just, to me, it's just such a powerful scene of we worry about so many things, where this is going to come from, where that's going to come from, but yet it's so easy for us to get that,
Just want to say something on Carol's point. We know that God's going to provide because we have the whole story. They didn't know that God was going to provide. They're still learning.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This was part of it was them going out. They had to trust God.
Wow.
We know how the story ends, so.
We do know how the story is, but we still struggle with that. Like they did a better job at it than we did, I think.
Oh, yeah, in many cases, yeah.
And some of that's our culture. I mean, we don't have to like go out and actually like grow our food, and it's so. When's the last time, even if you don't have a lot of money, there's ways to get access to food. At least in this. I mean, I've been to other countries, and it's like people go a long time without eating, and here. Maybe we skip a meal or two, or we can't afford it, but we're still like we still have it good, even when it's bad. All right, so let's turn to verse 30. Would anybody like to read that for us? 30 through 43 or 44. Go ahead, Butchie. 30 through 44. You want to read the whole thing, or do you want to split it up? It's up to you.
30 to what?
44.
I'll just stop at 32.
32, that sounds perfect, and then whatever you want to do.
The apostles gathered together with Jesus, and they reported to him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a secluded place and rest for a while." For there were many people coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. They went away in a boat to a secluded place by themselves.
Yeah. Shortly before this, John the Baptist was beheaded, and there's some evidence that Jesus knew at this time, and he was trying to grieve. It's not 100% specific in here because I was looking, but that's what happened prior to this, and all these people are gathering around, and come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. I always find it interesting when Jesus, we can learn so much from the way that he approached God and the way that he approached silence. Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. Many times in the Bible, Jesus got up, secluded himself so that he could talk with God. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. They had to get away from the people. The crowds were getting so much they had to get in a boat. Anybody want to read 33 through 36?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and the villages and buy themselves something to eat."
It's interesting here. Send the people away.
So they can go buy themselves
Something to eat.
Yeah.
Right? But why are the people there in the first place? To hear Jesus. Right? And what were they doing prior to this? They were being Jesus' street team pretty much and going out 2 by 2 and promoting, this ministry, and that's why all these people started to come. Yes. Correct.
So they knew Jesus.
Yeah, because when they were out doing in verse 13, they drove out many demons and anointed many sick people with oil and healed them. And as soon as word of mouth probably got out, everyone's like, well, I want what they got. You know, there probably was some type of envy, I would assume, where it's like, wait, you healed that guy, but you didn't heal me. I'm going to go see if this guy's going to heal me.
Think about like the woman at the well, with Jesus,
Oh, yeah.
After they had their discourse, she runs back to town, right?
Yeah.
Come see a man who's told me all things, right? Now you got 12 guys paired up, so 6 groups of 2. They're going out healing people, demonics, sickness, everything, and proclaiming the message. And they're, probably saying, come see for
Yeah.
yourself.
There's many times where, I pray that I can have that gratitude, right? Like I said, we have so much in this world that what do I need God to rely on for, right? Do I need God to provide for me? I do. I know I do. But there's many people that don't. And so sometimes it's hard to find that gratitude to, when you get something and you're like, this is a life changer, Maybe there's a certain app you get on your phone, or there's a device you get, or a toy that kids get that they just love. Oh, this is so great, you got to get one of these. When do we ever do that for God? Oh, you need to get this God. And I wish we had that gratitude. But that's why these people are here. We want stuff to happen. Tyler.
I just can't help but think about the disciples that they had to muster up some courage to be able to be like, all right, we're going to tell Jesus to wrap it up.
Yep.
And tell them to shut this down, because these guys. Anyway, it reminds me sometimes my prayer life. I got some great idea that I think God can help me instantiate. When really, I just need to give my problem to God.
Well, and the disciples are probably tired, right? Come and rest.
But to tell Jesus wrap it up,
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
pretty
I mean,
hungry.
sometimes on Sundays I see people doing this and like, hey, David, just give me a hard time.
You want to name those so David knows who they
Yeah,
are?
well, hey, I'm sure he can see him. He's elevated. Here's a good point, too, when it says here, and I don't want us to miss it, where it says in verse 34, because they were like sheep without a shepherd, so he began teaching them many things. Right? He had compassion on them because they were sheep without a shepherd. What do you think he's implying there?
They were basically lost. They didn't know what to do. I mean, and he was directing them.
There's the idea that, and we see this in the Old Testament too, right? When the Israelites were looking out and they're like, we want a king like that king. We want this type of king. And God's like, no, I'm supposed to be your king. And they're like, yeah, but we want like a king like everybody else. Could they have been there to say, hey, we want you to be our leader, our king? And we kind of get this by inference. They were like sheep without a shepherd, without a leader. They don't have a leader, so I'm going to teach them. All right, let's move on. 37 through 38. Somebody read that.
He answered and said unto them, Give ye them to eat. And they said unto him, Shall we go and buy 200 pennyworth of bread, and give it to them to eat? He said unto them, How many loaves do we have? Go and see. And when they knew, they said, 5 and 2 fishes. Did you say?
Yeah, so yeah, that's good. The apostles wanted them to leave because, hey, they're hungry. We can't do this. And Jesus says, give them something to eat. And they're probably looking around going, what? I mean, Julie, how hard is it for us to do a potluck here? I mean, we kind of got it down, but it's still pretty difficult. And hey, these people are hungry, give them something to eat. It's like, what are we supposed to give them? And then they're thinking it's a half year's wages. A half year's wages. Think about what a half year's wages is now. It's a lot of money. I was going to say maybe $50,000, but I guess it depends on who you talk to, Could be $30,000, but it's a lot. That's a lot of money. And it sounds to me like the apostles, do you want us to spend that much? Were the apostles carrying that much money?
I think some of it too goes back to when they were sent out in the groups of two,
Yeah.
right? They were supposed to, trust that God would provide.
Yeah.
Right? And so they're seeing Jesus, who they think they have ideas, who they think he is. And yet it's almost like Philip, just show us the Father and we'll believe. Philip, I've been with you all this time, and you still don't know that I am the Father or one?
They had the power to drive out impure spirits and heal people, and then Jesus says, feed them, and they're like, well, we don't have enough money to do this. And this is where the fun happens.
David and Christy will understand this. If you've ever gone into the mission field, you feel this way. You feel alone. And you feel oftentimes helpless. And you get to know God in a more personal, closer way than ever before when you know you're alone and you have to depend on God.
Yeah. I remember the first time I went to Haiti.
Yeah.
Right? We, with Healing Hands and coming back, it's weird when you're driving around and NATO's a part of the policing, and there's a tank with a guy with a blue helmet on and a machine gun on the corner, and you're like, let's go, this is exciting. But coming back home, we were told, hey, we have to take the long way around because there's a riot at one of the bridges to get there. And then the other bridge had flooded, so there were 3 bridges to get to the airport, and we had to take the one way to get to the airport. We left at like 8 o'clock in the morning for like a 4 o'clock in the afternoon flight because they're like, we don't know if we're going to make it. And then I'm just like, oh, okay, I guess we'll just trust in God we're going to get home, And if we weren't going to make it, we weren't going to make it. We were going to turn around, and we did everything we could to be safe. And it was safe, but you kind of get a little nervous because to us, it's a 15-minute drive for us to get to the airport.
Well, you knew you were going home.
Yeah,
When you're in the mission field,
yeah,
you're there to stay.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
And the circumstances are a great deal different. And you come
Sure.
to depend on each other and the Lord so much more. When my father left Nashville when I was about 3 years old, he went to Chicago with a little suitcase with 2 Bibles, 1 clean dress shirt, change of underwear, and the suit on his back. He didn't have a congregation. He knew no one in Chicago. He was all by himself.
Yeah.
But he trusted in God that it would work, and he started visiting people, relatives of people in Nashville, pulling young men out of bars and restoring them and building a congregation. He was alone, and I think about that now, what my father did. It was just really God working through him, and he trusted that.
Yeah.
But when you're alone, and you know you're alone, you have to trust in God.
Do you think we have, because I always, you hear stories like that. I think it's hard because I'm trying to think of the right question, but, distraction. Do you think we just have so many distractions now and so many comforts that why would I give this up to go do that?
Absolutely. Dave can speak to that.
Judy, you were going to say something?
Yeah. I've been on a couple missionary trips. I didn't feel alone because I was with a group and it was all very well planned. But it's unfortunate that every Christian can't take a missionary trip to see how people live and how those missionaries live working with these people. But one time we were going through the little tiny city and our bus was stopped and soldiers came on our bus and took all our passports. And there we sat on that bus and they walked off, and whoever was in charge of us and of the group, and they said, we don't know what's going to happen. And it is very, very scary. We just prayed and prayed, and they said they can take us all in, they can keep our passports, and so we prayed, and finally, I'm like an hour later, they came back on the bus and gave us our passports and told us to go on. We're so spoiled here. We're so
spoiled.
blessed.
Yeah.
So fortunate, blessed.
All right, let's move on to 39. Finish this section up. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000.
Wow.
What a crazy story. But this was the first time where I actually noticed in here that he grouped them in hundreds and fifties. Why do you suppose he did that?
To make the work less overwhelming, to make the
Okay.
work less overwhelming, that you don't have bunches lined up on top of each other to eat. You get, if you don't maintain some order, you get a lot of line jumpers.
Yeah.
The miracle was not just feeding the 5,000. It was having them in groups to make it easier to feed them. It also made it easier to collect the food that was left over.
Yeah.
That's part of the miracle as well.
Yeah. Yeah, keep in mind there's 12 disciples, right? So, hey, we're going to organize this, and you can be in charge of this section, you can be in charge of this section, and you can be in charge of this section. We got to distribute the food. But I think it was also so that people could see and hear what was going on. Where's this food going to come from? Wait, this group got food. How are we going to get food? Here it is, and here it is, and it just keeps coming. But it's interesting. I never noticed that. 50s and 100s.
We also got to remember it was 5,000 men. That wasn't counting the women and the
Correct.
children.
A lot of people. A lot of people. And it doesn't tell us how long this was, but probably a couple hours maybe?
Well, like a couple days. Yeah.
Could have been. They could have been there a couple days, but I mean, for them to eat, it's interesting.
You guys remember like Mary Poppins? That show from back when we were kids, right? Mary Poppins, she could just reach into that bag and it's just like never ending, right? She can pull out whatever she wants. Can you imagine the look on their faces as they went through the first, a few hundred, and like basket still as full as it was in the beginning? Like it's miraculously full.
You've got Mary Poppins. I've got Bag and Sag and Berry. Does anybody remember Bag and Sag?
I never heard that one.
Yeah, that was I think all that Nickelodeon show back in the day, and he had saggy pants and was like, oh, an umbrella, kind of the same concept. But it was Kenan Thompson, so when he was like 12, I don't know. But that's what he would do. He would just anything you needed, he had it in his pants.
Well, you made a good point there. Can you imagine the conversations among the people
Yeah,
while this is going on?
yeah,
Not just, are we going to eat? Look at everybody that's eating. There were only 5 fishes and 2 loaves,
Yeah.
and look at this. They were talking to one another, building each other's faith up at the same time.
You ever been to like a dinner, maybe a wedding or something, and they call you by tables, and you're like one of the last ones up, and you get up there and you're like, seriously, this is what's left? Isn't that like the worst feeling ever? But that's not what happened, right? And what I took this as when I read it this time, there were broken, like 12 basketfuls that they had to pick up. It was almost as if they were like, eating, and it was just falling on the ground. Like it was broken and they had to pick it up. So obviously there was a lot of food, but at the same time, how hungry were these people? Where were they manners? Why didn't they try to, I don't know, but I just started thinking, wow.
You ever eaten a fish?
Yeah, I've eaten a
You
fish.
can't eat the whole fish.
No, there's bones.
You break it up,
Yeah,
and you eat it piece by piece if you haven't had utensils.
yeah.
Bread's the same way.
Unless you're in Thailand, they eat that whole.
They eat it raw.
So you break bread up.
Because when I was in Thailand teaching English through the Bible, they cooked the fish,
Yeah.
and then they're like, "Are you gonna eat that eye?" And I'm like, "No, not gonna eat the eye. You can have that."
You could have
I didn't know
both
we were doing that, but if you're gonna take it, you go ahead.
of them. Yeah, both of them.
Ed,
I think it's an important point when he says here, he took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up toward heaven, it's as if he stopped all that was going on and made an important point. all of this is coming from the Lord, our God.
Yeah,
We're gonna stop right here and we're gonna thank him for what we, what little bit we have, we're gonna thank him.
yeah,
That's an important point that, I think Jesus has done before many times, to make sure that everybody acknowledges this came from God.
yeah.
And so that's what he did here.
He had them all sit down, and it says the grass was green, which is interesting because the other three versions don't say the grass was green, but we get the idea that maybe it was spring or summer. But I think sitting down was one reason, so everybody could see him standing up and what he was doing. Gina.
Also, if you read in John, it says right there that Jesus asked Philip, where shall we buy the bread for these people to eat? And he asked us only to test him, it says, you read John.
Yeah.
And it says that he already had in mind that he was going to do that.
Yeah.
Jesus did this as, to show everybody that he did that.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at the other accounts too and how they all kind of, you get a little bit different of an idea, but that makes sense because he already sent them out to get the people, to get the crowd excited. He knew a crowd was going to come. Everywhere he went, there was a crowd. At this point, the crowd was so good, he's like, maybe we'll feed them this time.
I'm going to read 2 verses in 2 Kings chapter 4.
Mhm.
2 Kings chapter 4, 42 through 44 says, a man came from Baal-Shalisha, bringing the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley, and fresh ears of grain in his sack. And Elisha, he said, give to the men that they may eat. But his servant said, how can I set before 100 men, this is during the midst of a famine,
Yeah.
who were starving. How can I give 100 men, set these loaves before them? Surely it won't be enough. And they shall eat. And Elisha said, the Lord himself has said, they shall eat and they shall have some left. And so he sent before them, and they ate and they had leftovers, right? So 100 men during a famine, you know what I mean? And so you see a similar passage or a similar imagery
Yeah.
going back to how the Lord would provide for his people. So that was interesting.
That is interesting. That made me think of my brother Adam. Some of you guys knew Adam. Some of you guys said, but he could eat. He could eat. And to this day, I got a lot of people like, you need to slow down when you eat. And I was like, you didn't grow up with Adam. Like if you didn't hurry up and eat, it was gone. It was gone. But there were always leftovers. But I mean, he went for it. Go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, it's interesting that that there was bread left over.
Yeah.
Because if I'm eating, I mean, I got to be like real full to say I'm going to throw this food away. That's kind of like another level for me.
Yeah.
You know, like the kids throw it away. I'm like, we're not throwing it away. We paid for it. You know, I'm that stage of my life. But I also think it's also, if I'm eating outside and I do not want the crust of my pizza, I'm just probably going to throw it. You know what I mean? And let some squirrel or something eat it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that they went to go pick all that up in my mind. Other than it comes back to 12 basketfuls, and there's 12 apostles who all kind of thought they had a solution for this problem.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know.
Well, it just goes to show you what they ended with more than they started with.
Yeah.
You know, which I think is kind of another point to put. They started with 2 fish and 5 loaves and ended with 12 baskets. How does that work out? You know, try to get your kid to do that problem in math. But they won't get it right. Russ brings up the idea of in this awesome encounters with God, the idea of a military, right? This is like Jesus' troops, and he's preparing them for battle. And I don't know if you guys see that in there or not.
Well, Sherry mentioned, you know, they're looking for a leader. They're leaderless. They're rudderless. And they're following him.
Yeah.
Thousands of them are looking to him as a leader.
Well, they were looking for the Messiah.
Well, just the amount of power you have to keep order with 5,000 people.
5,000 men.
Yeah. You can ask Jim and Michelle. I mean, they have, I don't even know how you do dinner at their house. You know, but it's kind of similar as to this story, right? You know, I don't even know how they grocery shop sometimes, but hey, kudos to them. I love it.
In the book, is he talking about him building an army with the apostles or with the 5,000?
With the 5,000, he's talking the idea of, this is the troop to go out. These people, they're going to do anything for for Jesus.
Yeah, I was
They're
thinking-
giving up everything.
I was thinking of the apostles because it was such a huge story to them. It was such a huge lesson to them. You know, they had no idea how they were gonna feed them, and then they're picking up all these baskets afterwards. It certainly had to instill in them another huge lesson about who he was, which he was constantly trying to convince them.
I think they wanted Jesus to stop everything and just, we're going to follow you everywhere you go. And you see here, Jesus is constantly trying to, hey, you guys keep doing what you're doing, but I got more stuff to do. Because right after this, he gets in, you know, the apostles get in the boat, and then Jesus walks to them on the water. You know, and I would have to imagine that these people are like, where's he going? I don't understand. He just fed us. But that's the idea. That's how you spread the God. Keep in mind, limited commission, right, to the Great Commission. Limited commission to the Great Commission. Now these people are going to tell people, look what we saw. This guy fed us. And now then people get curious, right? How do people find out about stuff? We get curious. Just think about on your phone. We shouldn't be scrolling so much on our phone, but sometimes we get curious, and then we start digging into stuff, and we start digging into stuff, and then we get all these ideas, and we're like, oh, did you see this? Oh my gosh, blah, 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 blah. We get curious. They became curious.
The old saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
And Jesus was showing his compassion for them by feeding them and not running away from them at that point. Because they had followed him. They followed him for miles.
Yeah.
And he was showing his compassion on them by feeding them. And it was a miracle. Nevertheless, as you pointed out, this took some time.
Yeah.
Sitting people in hundreds and fifties, that would be like putting 100 people on this side of the auditorium and 100 people on this side of the auditorium, but spread out, sitting together. It would take some time.
Hey, I know it's hard enough to get 150 people on the same page at the church. I've been here a long time, trust me, And sometimes I'm the problem. I get it. I try. But, that's hard. That's difficult. But Jesus did it like that. And that just shows you how good God is and how big our God is. And that's something that I think we can learn from this story. God is much bigger than we can even fathom. He can take small things and make them big. Right? God, they say in the Bible, God can move mountains. Right? What does that mean in our lives? Right? And some of us, we think, hey, I've been living off of that my whole life. God is moving mountains. Maybe it's personal mountains. But God can do great things.
Yeah, it's imagery.
Yeah.
We all have a mountain to conquer.
Yeah.
No matter the size of it.
We've been talking, Dave, you were going to say something, and I'll...
I mentioned how John, in chapter 3, about the lady, right?
Mm-hmm.
She said, come see a man. But then she also said, could this be the one? So you have the 6 groups of 2 that went out, have already healed people, cast out demons, you know what I mean? And so now, these people are following them back, and it's just, if his disciples can do this, what can he do? Right? And so there's all this curiosity, because they are waiting for who? The Messiah.
Yeah. And they're sitting there waiting, and this is probably the end. The sad thing is there's still people waiting. They kind of missed it. And sometimes when I think of Jesus coming back the second time, there's probably going to be a lot of people that miss it again. And maybe hopefully that's not me. Maybe you could pawn up and say, no, there's no way that's Jesus. I don't know. But now I'm curious of, hey, I'm waiting.
Book of Thessalonians tells us we're going to know.
Yeah.
We are going to know.
Flaming fire.
We're going to know, but I think some people may miss it. I was going to say we're in the teen class on Sunday mornings, we're going through a series called Do Hard Things. And it's kind of a rebellion against low expectations of teenagers. It's kind of the idea of some some Christian twins wrote the book when they were 17 years old because they realized we look out and nobody really expects anybody to, like, nobody expects us to do anything. You know, they expect us to, like, not learn how to tie our shoe and wear Velcro shoes, or they don't want us to grow up or go get jobs. And we've kind of been exploring that stuff, and I've been talking to the teens about why God created us in the first place. You know, he created us to do things, to do hard things. If you look in Genesis, it says, you know, God created us to be fruitful and multiply. So just with that, there's some kind of growth there. We know what the multiply means, right? We're all adults here, but the multiply, but just that idea of multiplying, being fruitful is growing. But then in Genesis 2, God put us in the garden for what reason?
To maintain it.
To maintain it, to work it, to do stuff, not to sit there, right? And then you see in Ephesians, God created us in advance to do good works.
That's Ephesians 2:10. I'm just reading it.
Yeah.
We are his workmanship,
Yeah.
created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand so that we would walk in them.
So one thing I get with this story is you see the apostles are willing to work. They're willing to go out and to do things. I challenge the teenagers, and I'll challenge you here, be like Peter when he saw Jesus walking out to him. What did Jesus do? He had to step off the boat. And sometimes we need to take that first step. And that's going to be the hardest step that you take. And then after that, it might get a little bit easier. But just think of anything you started in life, right? It's hard, but sometimes you just got to step off the boat and test the waters.
And that's the definition of faith.
And that's the definition of faith. And that's what this story, to me, is about faith. We need to have that type of faith. You're going to take 2 fish and 5 loaves and do what with it? All right, that sounds like a great idea.
Well, you mentioned the apostles didn't have all the answers, but they did have faith.
Yeah.
Let's see, faith is the evidence of things hoped for, but the substance of things not seen. That's faith.
Yeah.
And we all have to take that step.
And faith without action, right, is dead.
It's that.
So one thing we're exploring in the teen class is this idea that teenagers are just supposed to consume and be entertained all the time. But I don't see that in the Bible at all. What I see is this: we need to contribute as a part of the story, whether we're contributing at home, at church. Julie, I hope your boys are going home and cleaning their room, because I told them your mom shouldn't be telling you to clean your room. You should just do it and then make her dinner. But I don't know if they did that. But we're working on it. But that's the idea. And you know, you've got this. We live in such a consumerism-based society where we just need to buy this or do this or be that in order for us to find fulfillment and happiness. And God says the exact opposite. No, you need to do this type of stuff, and that's when you're going to find this joy. You know?
Sometimes, Matt, we just need to sit. We need to stop and think and meditate.
Yeah.
Psalms 46, tells us, be still and know that I am God.
A lot of us struggle with
We are
being
too
still.
busy. We're literally too busy.
So you got to manufacture that. Wake up in the morning early. Sit down on the floor
Yeah.
and just listen before you get to work. Because sometimes when work gets great, like I'm way better in the morning at being still than at nighttime. At nighttime I'm not. I'm like, read a book at nighttime? Are you crazy? But in the morning I can do it. But I have to work at it. I have to train myself to do that.
Well, the Lord was looking for a quiet place to go pray.
Yeah.
He couldn't find it. He wanted it.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a lesson there for the apostles as well.
Anybody got any final thoughts? We got 1 minute. And I think Jim's got it. He raised his hand, or he was either like, I'm going to press that button. What do you got, Jim?
I kind of think this particular miracle does a great job of illustrating how limited our view of God is, right? Like, in the business world, you get 3% growth for the year, and like the executives are doing cartwheels down the hallway, right? But God says, hey, my growth, it's 10, 50, 100-fold. God says it should not surprise you that I can take 5 loaves and feed 5,000. That's the sort of growth, the sort of results that God can give us.
The growth
and
is,
we think he's more limited.
The growth is in our heart, is what a lot of times, right? This joy, patience, and peace, and self-control. That's what we get by doing what God tells us to do. And I think we missed the point. We're trying to read a self-help book and going, why can't I get this figured out? Because God just wants you to walk in His glory, but you're trying to walk in all this stuff, and you're still buying this guy's stuff, thinking that it's going to bring all this joy and happiness to you, and God's got it right here. But anyways, I'll have a prayer, and then we can ring the bell. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for who you are, God. We thank you so much for the stories in the Bibles and the miracles that we can read about, just showing your goodness, your grace, your goodness, and your power, God. It reminds us every day that you can take small things and make them big, that you can take our tragedy and bring joy to it, God. We know that this world isn't easy. We know that it's hard. We know some days we feel beaten up and broken inside, but we know that you can provide healing, that you tell us a story where we can have redemption and salvation and a good life if we follow you and love you and are faithful to you, God. So give us that courage, give us that joy. Let us see mountains moved in our lives. In your Son's name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, man.
No problem.
Hey, my son, how are you, hon?